As a longtime Call of Duty Zombies fan, it's pretty tough to see how the modern age of COD has been handled, especially with the assets of the current generation of gaming. I can remember getting home from school on a Friday, shutting myself in my room, loading up Black Ops 1 with the randos I had just made friends with, and killing the undead all weekend long. And while these games are still around and still have thriving communities, it's just pretty shocking to come to realize that the progression of our favorite franchise is actually a serious regression. There is still quite a large community for modern zombies, and that's great. And I'm truly glad that the game's overall prospect is still alive and well. I'd also totally be lying if I had said I hadn't sunk a ton of time into modern zombies. However, it just doesn't have the charm and the grisly mystique that made OG zombies so flattering. Back in 2008, World at War had just been released, and upon finishing the amazing campaign, you were loaded into a new mode called Nazi Zombies, catching a lot of people off guard, as the game mode would only be available after the completion of the campaign, and it would soon after gain a pretty large online community sparking forums, wikis, and even YouTube content. As a passion project by a small group of devs at Treyarch, it was never expected to gain the insane level of popularity that it did, even with the amount of zombie-focused games that were out at the time, such as Left 4 Dead, Dead Rising, and Resident Evil 4. World at War's zombie mode was still receiving a huge amount of praise from fans, and would go on to continue to become a beloved franchise all on its own. At the beginning, there really wasn't much of a story or anything to the mode. The game itself brought a rich atmosphere of possibilities to what could have been the cause of the outbreak, and even had online speculators debating these topics. But the real turning point to all of this is when these speculators misinterpreted a sound that a zombie made when it hit you. They thought it sounded like Sam. This eventually reached the devs, and as the popularity of this game progressed, they questioned who the Sam person could be, and how they could fit this person into the overall story, laying the foundation to the storyline's success and creating the overarching antagonist Samantha Maxis.
Okay, Call of Duty, World at War, zombie mode. Now that's the bomb, man. Think on it, bro. They're not just zombies. They're Nazi zombies. Nazi zombies.
By 2010, zombies had become a mainstay on the Treyarch side of the Call of Duty franchise, and had set the tone for many more maps to come. Kino der Toten was the launch map for Black Ops 1 and was originally meant for World at War, but ended up missing the deadline for the game's yearly lifespan, and would ultimately put the first entry in the Black Ops franchise on the map for a series of successful map packs featuring all new zombies experiences: Ascension, Call of the Dead, Shangri-La, and Moon, along with the re-releases of the 4 classic World at War maps that started it all. Call of the Dead would be the first in the early part of the franchise to feature a cast of celebrity characters, and would set precedents for future maps to feature other celebrity guests, furthering the popularity of zombies and making it into something more than just an arcade-style game mode. The map 5 was also a launch map, but you'd have to complete the campaign to get it. But if you're an OG, you'd remember the 3ARC space unlock trick on the computer. But it would also feature a distinct cast, such as John F. Kennedy, Robert McNamara, Richard Nixon, and Fidel Castro. Set in 1963's Pentagon, it was an extremely polarizing map. All of the DLCs performed extremely well for Black Ops 1 and launched Treyarch into the right direction, as they'd have the groundwork to further their success in making their most critically acclaimed title. In 2012, a year after the release of the beloved Modern Warfare 3, fans were gearing up for the next installment in the Black Ops franchise. The promotion for the game was extremely promising, and the early playtesting reviews were very positive. This game is the perfect example of how good a game could be, and what it could achieve without fleeting microtransactions or a battle pass, being labeled an ambitious step forward in the franchise, highlighting its futuristic setting and fleshed out gameplay and mechanics. Zombies was different though. Players were divided on map scaling and complexity in overall gameplay. Transit being the release map was up to bat, with its overall reviews being pretty poor, as the criticism would be shifted toward a variety of things: the slow bus, the denizens, the fog, and at times the performance. At this point, it was a pretty well-known fact that Transit, being as big as it was for the most part too expansive for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, making it so that rendering parts of the map from a certain distance was not a possibility due to the hardware of that generation. To fix this issue, the devs added thick fog to the map so that the visibility was low, giving time to the system to catch up and be able to render buildings and textures. This was followed up by possibly the worst decision they could have made. adding the denizens, mainly so you could have to rely on the centerpiece of the map, the transit bus, making it near impossible to traverse in between areas of the map. This and the excessive amounts of lava. The areas in transit that you would visit would also have their own standalone round-based maps as well. Bus depot, town, and farm, which also had fans divided, but would end up receiving love from the Zombies community down the road. But if you had pre-ordered the game, you were awarded a bonus map that graced players with a little bit of comforting familiarity, Nuketown Zombies, which was received pretty well by fans, but was primarily considered chaotic and divisive. This map was primarily a story element to bridge the gap between the events of Moon and Transit, to help players get a better understanding of why the much-hated Victus team at the time was relevant to the overall storyline. But when the first DLC had dropped, fans were eager to get a new Zombies experience, something that would break the ground and get the sour taste out of their mouth. However, they were met with an absolute train wreck instead. Yes, I'm gonna let my opinion slip here a little. This map is a heap of fucking dog shit. From traversing the buildings, using the elevators to get back and forth between them, and getting lost because of how insanely confusing it is, it seems like the goal of this whole experimental direction they were trying to put out was just to push fans as far away as possible from the franchise. But Treyarch would soon revive their success and refresh fans with Mob of the Dead and Buried, but neither of those maps would quite live up to the success of what is probably the most acclaimed map of all time, Origins, which would ultimately go on to set major precedents in the future success of Black Ops 3 Zombies, and create a new and interesting road for the storyline to follow. In 2015, the release of Black Ops 3 was also received pretty positively, and compared to its predecessor Advanced Warfare, it ultimately took the cake for being the better futuristic-styled COD game, and would feature new and refined mechanics. Zombies mode would receive a major facelift with a few simple but quite noticeable parts of the game, such as 3 hit downs, being able to reload while sprinting, and the beloved sliding mechanic that would replace dolphin diving. And while the game would keep a lot of elements that made Origins, Mob, and Buried so popular, there were a great number of people who thought Zombies was declining under the leadership of Jason Blundell. Formerly directed under Jimmy Zielinski, Blundell would direct the game in a more objective-focused and fantasy-driven fashion, and while he'd been a dev at Treyarch for a while, his approach towards Zombies as head director would ultimately put a divide in the community and change the way people looked at zombies. Black Ops 3 would launch with 2 maps, Shadows of Evil and The Giant on its roster. While Shadows was a base game map, The Giant was technically the first Zombies DLC and was a pretty faithful remaster to the Blundell's pride and joy, Der Riese, but brought the narrative of the continued origin story along with it. This remaster was the true beginning to the rest of the DLC maps that would follow. Der Eisendrache, the second DLC map, would perform extremely well, leading up to Zetsubu no Shima, Gorod Krovi, and Revelations. Zetsubu would have some of the most polarizing and controversial story elements and map design, Gorod being labeled one of the best maps and a high point for the game, and Revelations a decent map but a sloppy take on the storyline's ending narrative. By that time, Black Ops 3 was widely considered to be the best Zombies experience and was praised by even longtime Zombies fans. And the praise would only get louder with the announcement and the release of the Zombies Chronicles. To this day, many fans still see BO3 as the best or peak Zombies, and with this being considered Jason Blundell's magnum opus, fans genuinely considered the fact that Zombies was over and done with. As a service to BO3 and the legacy of Zombies in general, BO3 on Steam had Workshop, meaning that Zombies players would have more content even after the game's lifespan had been over, a space for fans to make their own maps and keep things fresh and interesting with the game. New content is always coming out as a result of this, and even in 2026, BO3 is still the leader in the Zombies fan base for new maps and experiences. Indie developers are really handing it to their mainstream competition, staying true to what made the beloved game mode shine and giving fans what modern COD games won't anymore. 2018 brought us Black Ops 4, and Black Ops 4 brought us a completely new and overhauled Zombies experience. Fans were furious. The game became class-based, and most of the classic and beloved perks were smited from the game. No jug, no speed cola, no double tap. They labeled these perks crutches for gameplay. While the gameplay itself with 200 health, specialist abilities, and class presets were already defeating that prospect, disappointing players as the classiness of what Zombies was had been snatched away and replaced with a more complex and less unique and mysterious experience. While there were still classics on the list like Quick Revive, Stamina Up, and Mule Kick, a lot of beloved perks got brought back, but with new names and abilities or just complete overhauls of what the perk was. Electric Cherry was now Electric Burst, Widow's Wine would subsequently be replaced with Winter's Wall, and this was just the beginning. It was a disaster, as perks were now a preset tier class options instead of randomly placed around the maps. It was also later learned that Speed Cola could be obtained by purchasing all 4 of your preset perks, but wouldn't have a visible icon for the player to see. Black Ops 4 was heavily criticized for also breaking core mechanics and having too much of an overwhelmed multiplayer-esque HUD, alongside specialist weapons and the point system being scrapped as damage to zombies would earn you less and less points. The Chaos story, also being introduced, would rub fans the wrong way as the Aether story was still not yet wrapped up, and was rounding out with the promise of an epic ending. This is where Cold War comes into play. While Cold War was in development by Sledgehammer and Raven Software, the two teams had major differences in creative ideas, and ended up shifting the game to land in the lap of Treyarch. While this might have been a cool thing for Treyarch, it would cost Zombies fans the promised ending to their favorite story, and would ultimately fizzle out entirely. In the conclusion of Alpha Omega, there was a hint that we could expect to take part in the final epic battle of the Great War. The original set amount of maps for each storyline in BO4 was 6 maps each, and only 4 were actually released, meaning 2 each were shelved, and the Aether story's ultimate conclusion was a dud. Chaos story ended up continuing in the Dark Aether timeline. Fans were furious with the conclusion of Tagdertoten, and was in no way the worthy ending we'd all been expecting, and is ultimately the result of Cold War being mishandled. Not to mention, it felt even more lazy with the fact that it was just recycled content. There was always a good portion of the Zombies community that disliked Jason Blundell, or blamed him for Zombies taking on unnecessary elements or story arcs. But in the wake of Cold War being passed over to Treyarch, Blundell would also seemingly find himself in the midst of heavy community scrutiny, and ultimately not being directly hands-on or involved in the creative development of the games. Cold War itself wasn't entirely at fault for this story coming to a screeching halt, as Activision was burnt out on the narrative of the overall story and wanted to take the focus into new areas, and Cold War was the perfect candidate for them to force that decision. I know this video is specifically titled that Cold War itself is solely responsible, but in reality it wasn't entirely even the game itself that created the downfall. Instead, the compounding effects of Activision, Cold War's development, direction, and previous developers stepping away from the table. The game itself is really just the fall guy for how blatantly Activision mishandled and treated the fans of their previous games, by tearing down the poster wall of their past and expanding on new and fresh ideas for the franchise. In Rules 2020, the pandemic was just starting to slow down at the release of Black Ops Cold War, and fans were freshly stepping off the MW 2019 train, so this new Black Ops entry had some shoes to fill. MW 2019 was what some considered to be one of the best Call of Duty games in years, having the elements of what looked to be devs actually putting passion back into their projects, and it was beautiful. As development for Cold War was being handled under Treyarch, Sledgehammer and Raven Software stepped aside as supporting roles, making it the first time both sides of the COD franchise came together to make one game. Eventually, it would make it so that Black Ops and Modern Warfare's separate universes merged and became one giant storyline. Earlier on in the year, Jason Blundell, after 13 years at Treyarch, would step away from the company, before Activision would officially hand off Cold War to Treyarch, leaving Zombies no head director. It's not like they needed him. After shoving off a fan-favorite storyline led by Blundell to carry out a game that's basically on life support, who needs Zombies, right? Well, Treyarch does, because it was apparent to them that Zombies was a pretty firm part of the Call of Duty franchise by that point. It would be rebooted, and leadership of the game mode would be handed off to a guy named Kevin Drew. Drew and a group of senior members of Treyarch would find a way to reboot the Zombies franchise by following up directly from the end of the Aether storyline, from the new universe that was created at the end of that timeline, spawning the Dark Aether saga. A universe that is directly involved with the campaigns and characters from the main storyline,
meaning that the Ether timeline was the original universe before the creation of the new Dark Ether universe, featuring campaigns of World at War through Black Ops 7, which I don't consider canon, like, at all. Skibbity fucking toilet. Anyways, it makes sense, and the storyline is honestly pretty interesting. However, it isn't the story itself that is the issue here. It is plainly the fact that Cold War is a testament to how Activision and Treyarch are so willing to throw away a fan-favorite project in turn for a paycheck. The classic saying that COD games are just measly cash grabs was candlelit with this whole ordeal. Not to say that Cold War's multiplayer was bad by any means though. I'd actually say to date it's one of the best COD multiplayer experiences there is, and I still go back to play it from time to time. But Zombies gameplay was horribly mistreated. Even with the classic perks making a return, that's really about all that's good. The whole game mode got shifted into a Super Warzone-esque mode, ripping away the characteristics of what made Zombies so special and replacing it with a soulless cash grabby feel. Even the point system was butchered. You earn absolutely no points off of damage, and it's claimed it makes it more rewarding to only get points from the death of a zombie rather than racking up points leading to the kill. Honestly, one of the biggest kick to the nuts to Zombies fans ever. You may wonder why I went through all the highs and the lows of the franchise before getting to Cold War, and it's pretty simple. I wanted to point out the fact that the Zombies franchise has gone, of course, through its highs and lows. But this reboot and destruction of the original storyline kind of takes the cake for how disastrous it got. Even getting to a point where YouTuber Mr. T Lexify stated that Jason Blundell himself told him to move on from Zombies content because of its heavy decline. I'm not gonna get into the other games leading to BO7 because it just isn't necessary at this point. All of the information leading up to these newer games' zombie modes is a statement enough. And while fans are still giving Treyarch the puppy dog eyes, it kinda seems like fans are desperate for anything that will bring back an ounce of nostalgia. It feels like people are still playing these games in the new maps and are just trying to not to hate it and be happy with whatever is given to them. And to an extent it's okay, but it just feels like these feelings are genuinely forced instead of actually felt. Stripping a much-loved franchise of so many things and mainlining it just doesn't make sense if the original formula was selling so well. Anyways guys, if you've made it to the end of my ramble, I much appreciate you, and if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you want more Zombies content, hit that sub button, and you all have yourself a great day. Peace.